All right, here we go. Look at that. It is Now and Next. I'm Dave Trafford, and we are recording this on the morning of Tuesday, April the 28th. And we're back at it. We had a bit of a lull a couple of weeks ago, and we took some time off and did a trip to Portugal and to Spain. And I would just say, if you've never been to Spain, and I know it's not Three Dog Night, if you've never been there and you do go, make sure you go to Seville and you go to Granada and visit Alhambra. And the history alone in those two spaces, it was just extraordinary. So thanks to those of you who were patient enough and, enjoyed my time away. But here we are. We're back at it again with Now and Next. Bob Reid is in the chair along with Marie Aikins and Lindsay Broadhead. They are our comms and strategy team. And, it's funny, I would have thought that the world would have just slowed right down, Lindsay, when I went on vacation, but apparently it did not. So we had plenty of fodder for the On the Ledge podcast last week. We squeezed one in on Friday with everything that was going on at Queen's Park. But boy, again, no shortage of stuff otherwise to talk about. Can we start with the Sovereignty Wealth Fund? And hands up anybody who, beyond the title of it, and understanding perhaps, Lindsay, that you and I can invest in it and our investment will be protected, which makes it sound a lot like a bond. What else can you tell me about this Sovereignty Fund?
Well, we're going to learn more today. So, because the spring financial statement will be coming out. So by the time this is posted, maybe asterisk, we'll know a bit more, maybe not. This was one of those ones where I'm like, there must be an answer. And I'm not sure if there's an immediate answer. So I'll give you an interpretation. And then we'll see how wrong I am. We can do an over-under afterwards. But I think what this is an acknowledgement in any big infrastructure build, huge ones that they're contemplating. The Canada infrastructure leads that they're talking LNG, oil and gas, big transit. It's too risky for private business to go in and invest by themselves. Because they're, first in market type of projects, or isn't a precedent. So I think what this is it's a pool of money from which the government can draw and make projects less risky, right? So the government will be an important player. It's kind of a P3 in that way, and this is the pool. So that part of it makes sense to me. And I think it makes good sense. And especially if the kinds of projects government, and we're seeing it a bit in Ontario through like the Building Ontario Fund, for example. But we're seeing where governments can do these, traditionally more risky investments, even though they're not risky, but they have less risk in the money that's being put forward because it's coming from government. And they enable private investment to come in, and then they actually become money makers. So they're kind of projects that create wealth. And that's not to say that the government will then be, a for-profit agency all of a sudden, but that money will then pool back in to the fund. And then that theoretically on paper is what would feed it and give private citizens their wealth back. But that is so theoretical, and I do not understand exactly how, if I became an investor, you became an investor, how that money would be secured without additional risk to taxpayers. So that's the bit I'm quite eager to learn more about. But that's I don't know. A hypothesis from nowhere.
I think you've kind of rung all the bells that I've heard, except, Bob, that describes the Canada Infrastructure Bank.
Precisely. Precisely. Why do we need this thing? What is it? How is it different? And so much of the analysis that I've read talks about what it isn't. Mm-hmm. Right. It's modeled on Norway's North Sea Resource Fund. It's kind of like the Alberta Heritage Fund idea, Saudi Arabia, that they made tons of money over the years off of oil sales, and then they're using that money as leverage for investments in other things all over the world. Norway, I read, Norway is like the single biggest equity shareholder on planet Earth in terms of what they've done with that pool of their money. So this makes sense. Other countries do it, but we're doing it differently. This isn't a pool of money that we've made from selling stuff already. It's a pool of debt money, $25 billion. Come and get it. Where's that coming from? That's coming off the government books. So there are so many questions about it. But my take was, it doesn't matter if you understand this at all. It doesn't matter if you get your heads around it. This is purely a communications exercise. Yes, it's policy, and I get that part of it. But the whole point that they announced it yesterday with so many unanswered questions and so many unknowns around it, and so much of it being theoretical, is this is government trying to be seen to be doing something, and doing something tangible and doing something big. And I think they're leveraging Mark Carney's a really smart financial wonky guy who ran the Bank of Canada, ran the Bank of England. He understands all of this stuff, and he thinks it's a good idea. He's front and center on the announcement. Therefore, we, the people, can have confidence that this is a smart thing to be doing, and we should be supportive of it.
Well, it also occurs to me in terms of strategy, Anne-Marie, based on what Bob just said, is its distraction around what we might get out of the financial economic statement today as well. There's going to be things that are in there that will get buried because we're still trying to figure out what this sovereign fund is in fact, and how it's going to affect it. I do not share Lindsay's optimism that we're going to know any more by the end of the day than we knew at the end of yesterday on this.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those economic policies that, yes, Mark Carney is going to be really, really good at. And I think the first thing I thought of is the Prime Minister is focusing on putting the oxygen on the country. So I'm going to use that analogy. He's on a plane, and if you're the mother, you're supposed to put it on yourself first before you then help your children. And I think he's been very busy the last year putting that oxygen on the country to protect against Donald Trump and the recessions that are perhaps going to happen and so forth. But at some point, you got to stop breathing deeply and take care of the children. And I think we're getting, so people that are struggling to pay for groceries, struggling to pay for rent, haven't benefited from, can't even afford a card, so they don't benefit from the gas tax. They're not in any position to buy a home, so they're not going to benefit from that policy. I think they need everyday support, not these big economic policies. I think they're necessary, but he's got a huge, communication challenge trying to convince anyone what it is. And number two, why it matters to the rest of the country.
And we've been saying that now for a year to the day, Lindsay, in terms of this is what the new government, it was a year ago that, they were elected to this slim minority and now a majority government. We've been saying that the attention needed to be on the big issues externally, but at some point we wanted to see how they were going to pivot the message and the policy and the action to focus on what's happening at the kitchen table. So back to the sovereignty fund, that's like way beyond 100,000 feet above my head. It's not happening at the kitchen table. And I know we've talked about the challenge of pulling that thread before in terms of how we're going to bring those two things together. But it seems to me we're getting higher and higher and higher on some of the aspirational stuff, and we're not delivering on what's happening at the kitchen table.
This is, and Bob and Anne-Marie have both touched on this. The challenge with this particular initiative is, maybe we will, and probably you're right, we probably won't learn more today. The big worry is that it could just be too smart by half, right? It's like the carbon tax. Like, no one actually understood that tax in terms of how it affected families. So no one really, does it help the environment? Doesn't it? It became a boondoggle and just an easy thing for the opposition to throw water at. And because no one could argue the contrary, and it never really deemed any immediate benefit. So we're in this same cycle, right? Where this may be the golden goose of smart ideas. I don't know. But it won't matter. And in fact, it's a moot point if people don't think it's the golden goose of smart ideas, right? And this is where Bob's 100% square in the target is it's a communications challenge. It's not actually a financial challenge. It's not a financial solve. So, I think Canadians have, we keep using the phrase given rope. We've given more and more and more rope to Carney and his government, and we're supportive, right? We see that he's rebuilding alliances and allegiances with countries all over the world. He's rebuilding our, the balancing act, I guess, of what our relationship is with the States as a mitigation measure and a modernization. Fine. So if you agree with that, great. None of it matters if, to your point, David, doesn't translate back home. We need small projects, and it can't be $500 for groceries. It can't be these quick and dirty, oversimplified pieces either. It has to be really clear red thread and line through, we're doing X to benefit Canadians who are in position Y, and there can be no space between the two spots.
Well, I dare say, Bob, when you talk about it being a communication play, it's almost on the verge of being a failure. If you consider the polling that we saw from Angus Reid this week, and it touches on all of the things we've just asked about. Nationally, met and exceeds expectations, making living more affordable in country, way below expectations 12 months in. Surely the Liberal government was doing their own polling before they came out with this plan and tried to communicate it in such a way as to say, this is Canada strong.
I guess. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what the strategy is around this thing. And as Lindsay said, it is so not eye level at all. It does not resonate with people in tangible terms. We're policy geeks and we're trying to figure out what the hell it means. So there's a problem. And the average person, I mean, this will not land, I think, with most Canadians at all. I think it's going to be, Carney announced something. It's a big fund that's going to build things, and you can put your money in it if you want, but I don't have any money to put into anything, so I don't care. I really think this is falling flat. And again, the communication strategy, like, why now? What is driving this? Unless, as you said, Dave, maybe there's a big bomb coming in the financial statement and this is cover for it.
Well, and it's worth noting, and Lindsay, you alluded to this, Ontario has its own Protect Ontario investment fund. It's like $4 billion. And it was originally money that was set aside to help industries that were affected by the tariffs. Algoma Steel got a bit of it. So it was like a $5 billion fund. And then this year they decided we'll turn it back. But even there, Anne-Marie, the province is looking for somebody to manage that fund, to create opportunities and for investment and so on. As vague as that plan is, there seems to be more pixels in that picture than we're getting from the feds.
Yeah, I think with the other announcements, you kind of saw the projects that it's going to build. So you saw maybe why it matters. They sort of answered that question. They haven't answered the question for this. Why does it matter to people? And I think one of the communication failures we often forget about, we work hard to say what it is, but we don't figure out why it matters to people. And they haven't even gotten close to that yet. And unless they do, I'm afraid, actually, if there is a bombshell in the financials, whatever economic statement today, because no one, including most of the media, understand what he is announced yesterday, that might get lost too. It might be really, really good, but it might get lost. So he has a huge communication challenge, and it's going to get tougher for him. This is his second year. I think it's officially today, his Mark Carney's first year in power. And most say it's been very successful, super successful, especially in many communication areas. He's a great communicator, much better than I thought he was going to be as an economist. But some of these economic policies that he knows so well, probably in his head, is not. It's just not translating, and that's going to have to change this year for sure.
Well, and it's a year since the election, right? So
yes.
Today. So, but the thing that occurs to me, and to Anne Marie's point, Lindsay, and you talked about being too smart by half yesterday. You know, the Prime Minister was being questioned on what the deficit is likely to be, and it's like we're hearing it's going to be lower than was reported back in the fall in the budget. And one of the reporters brought up inflation, and the thinking being that because inflation is high and we've got taxes that are on certain items that are based on percentages, that government coffers were going to benefit from the inflation because the taxes are going to go up incrementally. The Prime Minister stopped him right there and gave, the Rhodes Scholar definition of how inflation affects it and whether or not, in fact, it's going to have anything to do with the deficit. So immediately just thud right against the wall and kind of slid down to the point where, yeah, okay, I get it, but still it's costing us more money and you're getting more money as a result.
And in politics, we know that if you give opposition space and maneuvering room for pithy one-liners and rebuttals, simplicity will conquer intelligence every time, right? And Poilievre is that guy, right? He's both smart and he, as we all know, has a kind of an odd enjoyment for rhyming schemes and these pithy one-liners. So even though Carney has the mic right now, I think if you're a liberal, I'm confused, I guess, because to your point, Dave, like all the research has pointed to there being a very real concern amongst Canadians that we need action at home. All the punditry for months and months and months has been like, oh, that project is probably just around the corner, when we're waiting for it, and it never arrives. So this vast smartness, is not going to work because intelligence isn't what communications is. Good communications, smart, intelligent communications is concise and reachable, right? Hearable. It's understandable. That is when communications is genius. It's not the PhD doctorate rendition of a response. And that is only the longer he speaks, the more space and gap he's creating for Poilievre and co to come in and go, brother, our people are hurting. Our people need cheaper food, better access to homes, better jobs, etc. And those are the messages that will resonate.
Yeah, Bob, when we're talking to folks about producing their branded content and podcasts, et cetera, the number one thing that we tell them, we know you think your organization is top notch and everything else, but unless you make your story about your audience, it falls flat. And those groups that we've worked with that have managed to do that have excelled. I mean, they have just kind of taken it to another level. So that audience first element is critical. So based on that, I'm just curious, while I was away, the Prime Minister did his fireside chat, I guess, 2 Sundays ago, and did this is the State of the Union, and I'm going to talk to you regularly about these things. Rough waters ahead was essentially the message. And then, kind of got into what was our strength is now our weakness in terms of our overall dependence on the United States. And it's been cut and sliced and diced several ways and spun out by opposition. My sense from afar in terms of how international media responded to that was a little different than what we got at home. The international media looked at it and said, wow, look at that. He's planted his flag for Canada and moving forward in this new world. Was sort of a muddied response based on that, what I saw here at home. But curious to get the take from you guys on how that landed.
It was pretty good for a day or two. It got attention that a long form video came out on a Sunday and took advantage of the quiet news front to have some legs, but they weren't very long legs. And at its essence, it was Davos 2.0 in terms of the major themes and the key points in it. The language against the U.S. was a little sharper. You just touched on, what used to be our strength is now a weakness that we must address. It's a weakness to be so closely linked to the U.S. and we've got to deal with that. We've got to do something about it. But that's a subtlety. And people haven't been talking about it for very long. Other events have overshadowed as they usually do. So I'm not saying it was a bad strategy or that the message wasn't good, but it was all right. It did its job.
Well, Anne-Marie, I think to some degree to that point, though, it met expectation in as much as it reinforced what he was saying internationally. Now I'm saying it domestically, and I'm going to promise to keep saying it to you as things evolve, as things change. So where there is uncertainty and concern around that uncertainty, at least I think there might have been some soothe there from him. Now, he's going to have to follow up. He's going to have to follow through, and we're going to have to hear from him, another 3 or 4 weeks?
Yeah, it does. It seems like eons ago now. It's not that long ago, but it does seem like forever ago. The news cycle is just so fast. I think there was more discussion about the vehicle in which he put out his message. The fact that he took it directly to YouTube. It was completely controlled by his communication folks, that they didn't go to major media. They didn't, you know what I mean? They went to YouTube. And I thought that was interesting. And I heard lots of discussion about the fact that he just went right to YouTube rather than to mainstream media or even alternative media. They just did it themselves. So, which of course prompted Poilievre to put out his own YouTube statement. But I think there wasn't much discussion about it other than it wasn't unusual for the prime minister to do this on a Sunday through YouTube, and he repeated his Davos comment. I too heard international media talking about it, probably more than Canadian media, frankly. And they were impressed with it, perhaps more than we were at home, just like you said, Dave. And I think he's going to have to, he made a commitment in it. The one I'm going to pay attention to is that he has to do this regularly. That he's not going to, this isn't going to be a once a year kind of thing or occasional thing. That the public can expect this regularly. So I will be eager to see, what does that mean? How regular does that mean? And we'll see if he's true to his word there.
Well, I think one effect on the international media, though, Lindsay, is they had the reporters all scrambling to Wikipedia to find out who General Brock was.
Right. Yeah, we're all getting a bit of a history lesson here. Yeah, that's right. That's true.
So, again, I wonder whether or not, again, some of the backdrops, say here in Ontario, where we're talking about the government being challenged on its lack of transparency, whether, in this environment, we're making an effort, at least, to say, this is what you need to know, and we're going to give it to you unvarnished. Even if it's hard news to hear, you're going to hear it from me.
It's a very distinct tone and kind of approach that he's taking. It's different than certainly what we saw in Trudeau. I don't remember seeing this from Harper in this way either. And then, it almost has a very sober, competent. It's a sober and competent way of communicating compared to Trump, who is very quick and fast and loose and frankly disgusting, but fast and loose from a comms point of view on his socials, or he'll issue videos, or he seems to be able to hold Congress for hours at a time when he does, his larger speeches and takes up a lot of TV time. These are very humble and quiet, saying and referencing, I don't want to use your time. I know you're busy. He said that a number of different times. That got quite a bit of coverage. So there's a humility there. But I mean, at the risk of sounding repetitive, because I do feel after all these months, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, as I'm sure you guys do as well, is that these are all very smart communications components in my mind, right? And they all fit together beautifully. And you're hitting on something also very important, which is, Canada, we blame the States for being too insular and looking inward in our news. Canadians do it too. When you're in Europe, because of the size and proximity to other countries, other languages, you're listening to how folks are responding all the time, and you're listening to the American news. So it is interesting that Canada has a bit of swagger on the international, a lot of swagger, actually, leadership on the international stage. But the repetitive point, it remains the same, that all of these brilliant communications tactics are hollow without content. They're hollow without action. And the rope that we've talked about, that we've given him, exists, and it will continue to exist to that point, that moment where we've had enough. And I don't know when that will be, but there is going to be a moment where there's a reckoning of, we think you're brilliant, but how does that translate? So that's the repetitive piece, is that on paper, it is genius, and it's going to be the stuff of textbooks, but you need the muscle and swagger to actually make it happen as well.
Well, okay. So in that context then, Bob, let's take it to the province here in Ontario, because, we had the Challenger jet issue. We had the Stephanie Smythe outburst from the premier, both communications fails in many respects. I mean, the premier himself saying, I should have told you I was buying a plane before I bought the plane, and then gave it away. And for the record, I have dubbed this the sudden halt and reverse tactic.
Chart.
That's what it is. So
I can spell, Dave.
Good job.
Just. I like it.
But it's one of those things where in this part of the world, Bob, Doug Ford gets off the hook on these communications disasters.
For the most part, but he had a really, really bad week last week because he got wildly off-brand. Doug Ford has built a very clear brand, whether you like him or not. There's no doubt about who he is as a person, as a leadership style. He's been very, very consistent and very true to that brand until last week, when he did two things that people went, what the hell is he doing? This does not sound like Doug Ford. What is going on here?
And they were conservatives among those people who were saying that, right?
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, that was at the heart of his really bad week, was going off brand. Mark Carney's built a really successful brand, I think, over the last year. And the long form video we were just talking about, reinforced all of the positives about that, right? It was designed to say, I'm here, I'm paying attention, I'm the smart guy, the steady hand on the tiller, I'm the thoughtful guy who's thinking about stuff and doing stuff. So he's been good at building that. And as long as he doesn't fall off that, as Lindsay says, he'll still have rope. But at the end of the day, politics, of course, is what have you done for me lately? And that's where, as we've been saying all the way through this discussion, we need to see something tangible. We need to see something eye level. We need to see something that we can see, feel, get our heads around. The move on the gas excise tax was a good one. Again, Anne-Marie, that seems like a long time ago now, but it was tangible. It was effective. It was government saying, we know you're getting killed at the gas pumps and there's something we can do about it. And we just did it. And isn't that helpful? We need more of those.
Well, what's interesting, again, you look at the international response to that, and we were in Portugal when it happened, Anne-Marie, and I know Italy has done something similar, France has done something similar, and I don't think Portugal is there yet in terms of that tax relief. And so we had a driver taking us to the south of Portugal, and I was asking him about, the hit on his business in terms of the gas prices. Gasoline at the pumps in Portugal was €2 a liter. And the exchange rate when we were there was $1.70, $1.75. So it was exorbitant. And when that news hit the Portuguese communities, they said, "Well, look, they're doing it in Canada. We're not doing it here." So it was interesting to see how that ripple effect happened right away. But I want to come back to Doug Ford, and just in terms of the being off brand. What I find interesting, and last week we did our version of On the Ledge, and John Wright's advice to the Premier and the Premier's office was lay low, just kind of go off and be quiet. The legislature's not sitting this week. We know the Premier's working from home, but the idea that he is not doing his podium Premier presentations over the last few days, maybe he's good advice, might be a coincidence, but it plays into that recuperating his brand, I think.
Oh, I think exactly. I think Bob is right that he was off brand, and he's all the ministers and his staff do is walk back things he says, and he's often been the last month or so at other events announcing other news where he suddenly goes off, talks about a subject that has nothing to do with whatever he's announcing that particular day. He's just been all over the place.
Unrelated news conference today, right?
Yeah, every news story, it starts off like that. So, and it's been wildly, the Island Airport was a good example of that one. First off, the secrecy and the lack of transparency. And every time someone else comes to the podium, they reveal something else about it. And now we're seeing a map of the expropriation of so much of the islands, and I just don't. It's just kind of going off the rails, this Island Airport stuff. But he keeps saying things that have to be walked back, like the reason that Toronto's building all this housing down at the Portlands is to kibosh expansion of the Island Airport, which is crazy. They're building housing because that's exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and that it's needed. And now they're walking back. Oh, it's not going to impact Toronto's ability to build homes that are needed down in the waterfront area. So he's off brand. I haven't heard from him in the last few days since the Stephanie Smythe incident. I don't think he's said anything. Apparently, he contacted Stephanie and said he was sorry for it, if she was offended by it, probably. But that was John Wright. I listened to that podcast and I thought he should be listening to John's advice. They need to take him out of the public eye because he's completely just off brand.
Lindsay, I want you to compare and contrast then the Premier's challenges vis-a-vis comms last week and the way Stephanie Smythe responded to the outburst. Just to give me your read on that.
I've only met Stephanie a couple of times, and I'm always impressed by her demeanor, and just her humor, frankly, as well. I don't know if she knows me from Adam, so if she hears this, I'm just a fan, I guess, as opposed to. But her reputation is one, as I understand, to be, she's chosen a party. However, she was abundantly professional. And I think being especially a leading news person is not an easy job on the easiest of days. And I take great offense, actually, when journalists are critiqued from a personal point of view. We saw it with Elisa Laflamme in extreme ways. But this is not dissimilar. And that's not to say journalists don't falter or, there are poor journalists out there. There are. But when you're of a certain caliber, I think they should be, that part of their lives should be celebrated. So he did the one thing you're not supposed to do, which is go for the personal jugular. There are any number, the Liberal Party right now in Ontario is hardly like a freight train of strength as it relates to the number of people in power, right? There's still a very disproportionate power um, swing to Ford and the Tories, and that's just the state. He could have said any number of things. So to go for a personal dig like that is cheap, lazy, and frankly, it's just not. It's unbecoming. So when you talk about brand, right? Ford for a long time, not at the beginning, but for a very long time through the COVID years till now, has been very consistent. Even when he's flip-flopped on decisions, he's been consistent in his demeanor, his humor, and his ability to rise above it. That consistency over the last little bit is gone. Comparing that to Carney, so far, Carney has been incredibly consistent in not going into the political fray, staying above it. They're very opposite characters in many ways, but very consistent in their consistency. So that's for me the big difference is it's the tone, not even the substance that matters often, and the tone of the premier in the last little bit has been very off color. As it relates to the airports, I can only comment so far here because I work with airports and I'm a fan of airport development. So I'll show that bias right out of the gate. It's very hard when you have politicians speak on behalf of an issue, whether it's airports or anything else, beyond offering support. When they start to get into the nuances of the deal, then I believe politicians are overstepping what they're actually supposed to be trying to achieve. We need to let the private sector do the private sector sometimes, and let government do government. And you can't step in each other's ground or else there's going to be problems. And I think for the airport, that's exactly what we've seen.
Yeah, it's the old line, Bob. The committee got together to design a horse and we ended up with a camel. And in this case, it's a really good example of that because we've got the city of Toronto up until last week. We've got the Toronto Port Authority and we've got the federal government. And now the Ontario government stepping in to say, well, we're going to take over what the city was doing. And there's no one single voice. And the federal government's been very quiet on what's going on with Billy Bishop and the island and Norway. The park there, Little Norway. So all of this is becoming more and more confused than clear, particularly when you begin to read stories or comments from the Toronto Port Authority. It's abundantly clear to me that Queen's Park and the TPA have been talking about this for some time, and that it came as a surprise to City Hall in Toronto, and maybe even some of the MPs, the federal MPs here in Toronto. So therein lies that real issue where, if he's the premier who listens to the people, it is selective hearing, where we weren't doing that with this in this case. And so you end up with us filling the void where it's almost becomes conspiratorial. And boy, it's hard to get out from underneath that rock once that's thrown at you.
Yeah, it's always been a mess communications wise around, and I'm talking about the airport, Billy Bishop, because of the three levels of ownership, right? They all have a stake in it, and it's only when they're very coordinated, the three levels, that the comms goes well. What also is happening here is this is a bit of a gift to Olivia Chow and company,
completely,
right? Because it gives her something that she can tee off on Doug Ford against, and play on the symbolic, romantic, whatever you want to call it, components that come into play with the islands, the park, the airport, the waterfront from the city's standpoint. And she remembers full well the success that David Miller had in fighting the bridge to the airport and all of that stuff. So it's a bit of a gift for her, and I think she's actually leveraging it quite effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, Anne-Marie. It's the first thing I thought when I heard this playing out. I thought, okay, well, Olivia Chow's going to run on that. Now, if you take that further, the premier has given, actually some fodder for a number of municipal politicians, Niagara, all these other places where he's decided that we're going to have some change in effect, that he's not on the ballot, but he's going to be run against by a lot of these, and he will be effectively run against because of the messaging that he has allowed, whether it's mayors in Niagara or here in the city of Toronto or municipal politicians. He will be the focus of their comms and their strategy in terms of re-election or election at all.
Oh, he's going to be part of many municipal election strategy, which is 6 months away, because of the changes to not only, as you say, the regional chairs, but to the school board trustees. So he's going to be a big part of the discussion. And I think one of the mistakes I think he made, this is speculation, but with Olivia Chow, based on her lack of fighting Doug Ford, he makes deals with her. You get money for this, but I think part of the deal is you keep your mouth shut. You don't argue. You don't fight me on this. The Science Center, the Ontario Place, those are all ones she's been very quiet on, but I think those are deals that are forged with her. The Island Airport, I think, was one he didn't think she was important, I think, or so whatever happened. He did not, doesn't seem to be any deal in place because she is right away out there, focusing more on the park, the Norway Park, but there's so many other fights she's going to be able to champion because as information gets out in a very vague fashion, I referenced the map. There's a map that says that they'll have to expropriate so much of the islands, and he wants a fight on his hands. Whoa. Those island squatters, as he calls them, are, that they'll give him a fight. And it will be a big part, I think, of the municipal election, which will, I think work against him in the long run. But it's just going to be an interesting fight because he's, for some reason, made himself such a big part of the city of Toronto and a big part of other municipal governments. And the overreach is just boggles the mind, I think, at how much overreach that he's doing that I have never seen before.
Well, in some respects, though, Lindsay, let's take Olivia Chow and her willingness to, make him the target of her re-election effort. She doesn't have to win the argument to win the election as a result, right?
No, it's a complete wedge issue. I mean, if I were advising Doug Ford right now, it's not dissimilar to what you say to a CEO, right? Who's spending too much time in the weeds on the VP's files, right? If the VPs aren't performing well, then change the VPs, but that's not CEO work. CEO work is higher. And it's the same advice, right? Like his numbers are going down. He sits on healthcare, education, housing, amongst other biggies, but those are CEO territory. That's where he should be dancing and throwing his political might behind. That's where he's going to get reelected, I dare say again, if he has success there. Because again, God bless the competition and the opposition right now, but there isn't yet the might to fight that. And he could, if he's searching for a legacy, focus in on healthcare, housing, and education. Anyway, it's a viewpoint of one, but I think we're starting to see it in the data. We're starting to see it when there's a disproportionate focus on one municipality, specifically Toronto, when you look at Windsor, London, the number of municipal centers right now that need his political heft, you're going to anger other municipalities because of the disproportionate focus on downtown Toronto.
Yeah, it's easy, I guess, Anne Marie, to say, the rest of the province doesn't care about what goes on in Toronto. The fact of the matter is, to Lindsay's point, they feel like they're being neglected because there's so much time, energy, and oxygen spent on Toronto. I want to get to the piece that you wrote for The Star in the wake of the FOI limitations, which, by the way, was all part of the omnibus bill, which included the budget. I mean, we all look at it like it's a bunch of different things. It was, so if you voted against the budget, or if you voted against FOI, you were voting against some nugget in the budget that you didn't like. Anyway, but I thought it was an interesting take that you had in the Star, that based on that, we're going to more likely see more leaked documents, more people coming out and, telling the secrets behind closed doors about what the government's up to, because we don't have access to the Freedom of Information legislation today that we had, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. The piece I wrote was, I don't know about you, but there many of the major outlets have spent an inordinate amount of time doing FOIs and revealing stories that were long buried from the government that end up in a scandal. So they do that. They're going to have less access to that, obviously. But I'm also seeing more and more leaks that are, whether it's an internal agency like Metrolinx, they are just a constant source of leaks to various different outlets, and so are other ministries, and so are other government sources. So it's getting an increasing problem. And then you always are reacting to a story. If it's a leak, the news outlet has already written the story when they come to you, and if you're lucky, you'll get in the story at all. But most people don't even get in the story because they don't respond in time. But I think that's going to increase if you're giving, and this the Doug Ford government as a whole is giving the notion as you don't have the right to know this, and that the privacy commissioner is just political and that sort of thing, and the auditor general is just political, and so that you just don't have the right to know. And because that is permeating, I think, through government and government agencies, it just does encourage public servants, most of whom, because I've worked in various capacities with public servants, are very dedicated people. They join this organization, most of them, because they want to build transit, they want to make things better, they want to improve the public health of the province. They're really passionate, committed people, and when they're disillusioned that they see bad things happening within their organizations, they will leak them. You just encourage them to do that.
Bob, does it surprise you that the Freedom of Information changes resonated so highly with the general public? Because we're seeing it in various surveys and polls where people are putting their hand up saying, hang on a minute here. What the hell are you doing? What are you hiding, basically?
There's a natural suspicion that people have about governments in general. And when something like this comes up that has a smack of believability to it, that they are trying to hide something, and that's why this is being done, it's easy to glom onto. So to answer your question, no, I'm not surprised that there's been a lot of pickup on this, because it resonates with people, and people go, yeah, see, they're up to something. They're trying to cover their tracks. There's that believability to it at a gut level for people that makes them sign on to it.
Lindsay, you brought to our attention, it was an interesting piece, and then when I read it, it was about the pressures on Gen X to be rich and to be, dealing with their financial well-being. And when I first saw the headline, I thought, well, of course, this is the generation that's being bombarded by betting ads and apps and everything else. And when I
Gen Z. And not us old Xers.
Yeah, exactly. And when we looked at the article that you sent along, that was one of the first things it said. So the point was, I think they were trying to make was, you need to invest, but don't gamble. You need to invest, but take good advice. And I didn't realize until you told me that it came from a financial institution that was selling that advice.
Yeah. Well, this was just, why I love this podcast is we're a bunch of comms nerds, right? So we just look at the world a little bit differently. So when my bank, this was RBC that owns my life, fed me this article, the headline caught me and I read it. So this is already like, it's a marketing piece. This is what we get from our banks. And a lot of people may bid it. Some people may read some of these articles that they post, but it was at its heart, I think, talking about something really interesting around how younger folks and males in particular, the article didn't point out gender, but so I'll add that twist, but younger folks are being compelled to wealth and quick fix schemes. So, and we see this, talk about communications, like the entire ecosystem of what is being fed to young people through, if they watch sports, it's often, includes gambling ads. There's gambling, and I'm not blaming everything on gambling, but there are gambling elements to all of it. The gamification of Roblox, and different things that kids play from a young age is also encourages gambling. The very nature of the play is to accrue wealth or to accrue points in different ways. And it's not in a Mario Brothers way. It's in a gambling way. And these pressures across the board, also including what we're talking about before around the dissemination of trust in media. So kids aren't believing that what they're reading is true. So they're going to their own subset of truths, their own news sources to get information. And they'll go to Reddit feeds. They'll go to all of these feeds that are tailored and provide advice on what stocks to invest in. We're empowered now more than ever. You used to have to go to a broker. Now you can day trade quite easily through your own banking system. So if you have a small amount of money, that's, I have a better chance of being successful than accruing wealth in a more steady way. I think that previous generations were taught what success is and what it looks like. So I hope what I'm saying doesn't come across as like a boomery kind of interpretation of this. But I see it live in my kids. I see it live in my young peers and different clients and work environments where what they're being fed isn't truthful in the way that we're used to it. And the value placed on, I hate to say it, but an honest day's work and what that means, what that is, how that serves the soul, isn't converted in the same way. So this little marketing piece kind of triggered that for me.
Yeah, Bob, and as Lindsay describes that, you're looking at this demographic where the elders in that group have lived through a couple of recessions, and if you want to call COVID the recession, and now we're in the middle of this economic global crisis. That's a lot of economic stress that they have been exposed to at a very young age. They haven't known a whole lot different. At least in my experience, mine were spread out, decades between some of these situations, and you saw the opportunity for the economy and careers to rebound and become more stable. There hasn't been a lot of stability in their lives since 2008 to now.
No, that is exactly their lived experience, and also the good old days do not exist. Like the old model does not deliver for this young generation, right? Where you get a good job, you save your money, you invest in smart things, and over time that'll pay you dividends, and that's the way that you build wealth. None of that works anymore. Right? They're having trouble getting jobs. They're having trouble getting decently paid. They're certainly having trouble affording anything. And so there's that on the one side of the equation, and then on the other is bombardment of stories of people who have gotten rich quick, who got into Bitcoin and made out like bandits. You don't hear about the ones who lost their shirts so much, but there's a romanticism around things, like that, or the tech bros who in their 20s are gazillionaires because they hitched to the right wagon. So there's great pressure to find that thing as well in a world where the old paradigm doesn't deliver for you anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and just for context, Musk Altman court trial court case begins today, and you talk about sort of the Godzilla versus King Kong economics that just doesn't relate to that demographic. But again, that idea that you can be an influencer, Anne-Marie, and make money or whatever it is, and we roll our eyes at it. But the point is that, and as Lindsay points out, that seems to be the thing that's most certain or provides the most stability for that younger group. The jobs aren't there. The stories recently about the number of 30-somethings that still live at home because they can't afford to get out. And if they are going to get out, they need to actually be able to make the money to get an nest egg so that they can move forward. But it's a really tough treadmill that they're on. And we have to recognize that culturally and politically. And when we don't, we get Donald Trump.
Yeah, we have to recognize that, I think, do more listening of that generation about what are the things they are facing and why they make decisions they make. And I don't know if, Lindsay, your bank actually listened to that demographic and got a really good sense of what it is they need, what it is they're looking for, and so forth. Maybe they did, and that's why this communication marketing thing was created. But one of the things just to close off this because I know we're probably getting close to wrapping up, was that the Ford government is wanting to come hard on because the attendance rate in high school is piss poor. But I don't know if they listen to why kids, because their solutions for it are really not going to meet the needs, what kids are saying, why they don't go to high school. Why do they don't attend?
Give them a failing grade for not showing up. That'll make me like you.
Yeah, right. And make me want to attend that year. So if we aren't going to listen to them broadly on all of these subjects, we're really not going to find solutions, because they are facing problems our generations and many generations never faced before.
Yep, indeed. So those of you who are in the need of good advice, and perhaps someone who needs good comms advice, advise them to listen to this last hour, because I think there was a lot in that. Bob Reid, Marie Aikins, Lindsay Broadhead, they are our comms and strategy team here on Now and Next. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back at it this week as well. We'll have a new episode of On the Ledger Ontario Politics podcast, and we might dig in a little bit more on the 900 meters of runway that they say they're going to need to expand the island airport. That'll go over really well. All right, I'm Dave Trafford. This is Now and Next. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.